everybody, welcome to the Geek Vault. It's your boy Dre. This is the entrance to some of my older content videos. So if you're seeing this, thank you for watching the video. Thumbs up, thumbs down if you don't like it, thumbs up if you love it. Comment below. Let me know what you think. Subscribe to the channel so you can see more of new content, old content, whatever content in the middle. But in any event, I just wanted to have this video kind of go out there. So if you see in the video, like, why does it say Dre's Geek Depot, or it says Toy Chats, or the Geek Dad, or the Nerd Dungeon? These are older videos that I did years ago, last year, or a few months ago, and I wanted to rebrand them under this channel, but it would be a lot of work just to re-edit everything out. So I'm just editing this video in so you guys can see, hey, it's me, and it's the Geek Depot, or not the Geek Depot, duh. It's the Geek Vault. And eventually, like I said, when I started this channel, if you watch that first video, it tells you what I was doing about rebranding. But eventually, at some point, I'll make a video explaining the whole thing. So thank you for coming, for watching this video, and I hope you enjoy the content. Stay geeky, y'all. Peace. Hey everybody, welcome to the Geek Depot. I know I did not give you guys any new episodes last week, and I'm so sorry. I was under the weather. I just was not feeling at all good, and when I'm not feeling good, I'm not going to give you guys a bad show. So I spent some time. I got a bunch of episodes I'm going to try to crank out this week. Well, at least 3 episodes this week, so one more for you guys that haven't last week. But since I know you guys have not had one of these in a while, and I love doing them because I love your reactions, I love the comments I always get on these, a top 5 list. So, the top 5 list this time is going to be the top 5 90s cartoons. Now, you're probably like, Dre, this has got to be a hard list to compile. Because how does one take every cartoon of the 1990s up until 1990 to 99 and be able to say, oh my god, these are the top 5? Well, I actually looked around and I soul searched. I talked to a couple of friends and I found the top 5. So, without further ado, cue drum roll. Silly, I know, I don't have a drum yet. Number 5, Pirates of the Dark Water, or Pirates of Dark Water. Now, this cartoon really obscure. Not a whole lot of my friends remembered this cartoon, but I did. It was in that vein of, you're so obscure, but you're cool. Takes place on an alien planet of, if I'm not mistaken, I wrote it down here because I was like, wow. It takes place on the planet of Mer, or Mer. I couldn't figure out which one. It sounded like Mer, which I thought was Mer, like the French word for ocean. So, or mar in Spanish for ocean as well. But basically it's a whole world that pretty much is in this fantasy setting where they have talking bird creatures, they have a city that was kind of like the center for magic, and it seemed like technology, but it had fallen, and in the place of this was this evil Icarus solution called the Dark Water. And only one person named Ren, who had like a broken relic from that era, was able to, you know, rid the Dark Water, or like cure it in a sense, or purify it, I guess, I don't know. But it was just a cool cartoon because it was pirates, it was magic, it was alien, it was different. And it was so sad because it was only 1 season long, 21 episodes when I actually looked it up. And I was kind of like, wow, I thought it was longer. But back then, cartoons did feel a little longer because it was maybe once a week, you know, on a Saturday morning. Wasn't always the typical after-school cartoon. But for me, this had to make my list because of just its obscurity. It was just a cool cartoon. I had some of the figures. I loved everything. So, sad that it only went to, you know, 21 episodes. Hopefully somebody someday decides to reboot this cartoon and we get to see it come back with a little bit more of a cooler twist. So, Pirates of Dark Water, number 5. Number 4 on the list, Animaniacs. Now, a lot of my friends that I had spoken to, they were like, well, why would Animaniacs make your cut, Dre? Like, it's not the typical cartoon. For me, Animaniacs holds a personal place in my heart. A lot of you that know, I have a BA and an MA in history, in Asian history. Well, mostly history, just in general. But when I went to grad school, my professor had us memorize the nations of the world. And the song, The Nations of the World, helped me memorize parts of Africa, which we had to do on the map. It was to get 5 grade points. I ended up getting like 4.5 out of 5, which is like the best score in the class, because nobody could name every continent, every nation in Africa, and I knew them all. I mean, I listened to this thing on my old school, big boxy MP3 player that was like the size of two of my PS4 controllers. And I would listen to this thing ad nauseum all the time, every day on the way to grad school. I would drive in the car, I would listen to it on YouTube, on the way when I went to go train in the city, whatever, I would listen to it. But Animaniacs had such memorable stuff, and since it was like an anthology show, you had all these great side stories and side characters. The Goodfeathers. I mean, come on, if you're a fan of mobsters and mafia, the Goodfeathers were like, are you talking to me? You talking to me? I'm talking to you. You think I'm funny? You think I'm funny? I mean, it was a great riff on Joe Pesci, and the whole mobster mafia thing. I used to love watching that. And of course, the apex of the show, Pinky and the Brain. I mean, they were awesome. I mean, great stuff, ahead of its time. And for me, who was still rather in my early teens, well, I don't want to say early teens because I was born 78, so 90s was like my mid to late teens, early 20s. The show wasn't that far above my head, but I did notice that my cousins and family members that were watching it were definitely missing the jokes. And as an adult, I've gone back on YouTube, I've rewatched it on Netflix, and I definitely laugh a lot harder now because those jokes just carry more weight and are a lot more funnier for me. But Animaniacs, you were a show that was, like I said, ahead of your time and definitely awesome. Number 3, Disney's Gargoyles. Now, I had to seriously stop and think on every Disney cartoon that had come out during the late 80s, early 90s, into the 90s. I mean, you had Gummy Bears, DuckTales, Tailspin, Darkwing Duck. I mean, Chippendale's Rescue Rangers. So many great Disney afternoon cartoons that I was like, Gargoyles was their darker show. And of course, the Star Trekker that I am, yes, I like Star Wars, but I'm a fan of Star Trek. To have 90% of the cast from Star Trek, The Next Generation, be voices for the main cast. I mean, that is fantastic. Michael Dorn was the voice of one of the villains. Xanatos was voiced by William Frakes. Marina Sideris voiced Desdemona or Demona. I mean, Brent Spinner was the voice of Puck, one of the main villains in a latter season. I mean, it goes on and on, the cast of characters that all voiced these phenomenal, concept ahead of its time again. Disney Afternoon, I shouldn't even say Disney Afternoon, this was a Saturday morning cartoon. I barely remember it being on the weekdays, and if I did, it was always like the last cartoon before the evening news would pop up. But I do remember watching it a lot on Saturday mornings, especially with my best friend Larry when we were growing up. I definitely remember watching it with him. And I used to love it because Xanatos had this we're going to get these gargoyles that were the defenders of their kingdom, and oh my God, Goliath was such a deep character. And the voice actor for Goliath is such a famous African-American voice actor for cartoon characters and just an actor in general. I mean, I remember him as the voice of Spawn in the HBO Spawn series. I remember him as being just, he was not the villain, but he was the mentor in the failed hero show called The Cape. Yeah, I know, NBC, when they had the burst of all those superhero TV shows, I did watch The Cape, as terrible as it was. But he was one of the villains that actually, or heroes, I should say, that was like an anti-hero. I can't even really say what he was, but he's a great actor. And that guy, and he did this great depiction of a leader who was torn, who had a hard time trying to lead his people and trying to deal with living the best way of putting it, living outside of time. Like, he was from medieval times, and now he's in the modern era in New York, renaming his gargoyles after key points in New York, a place that I grew up and I still love to this day. You know, it's an amazing things. Like the dog was Bronx, one of the older one was Brooklyn, and they had like, they all were, and I mean, the cast was just such a cool cast. And then you had the Eliza, who is the Spanish hip cop, who like works with the gargoyles and hated Xanatos, and Xanatos is, I mean, just, I can go on and on just about gargoyles. And I'm eventually going to probably do a video just on gargoyles, because the show is getting rebooted into a movie, and I'm hoping it's animated, or at least not, yeah, animated. I don't want to do a live action. Do like complete animation for it, or CGI. Thumbs up, Disney, please. If you watch my videos, which I don't know if you do, but if this video does make it to you, Disney, please do this as CGI, or just sell, or go back to your cell animation. It'd be awesome. But Gargoyles definitely was one cartoon that was 3 seasons long. I've seen tons of Kickstarters for it, and you know, I'd love to, you know, see it return, and hopefully we will in the next 2 years when Disney actually slates the movie to come out. Now, number 2. Now, I had found this one on one of the online magazines, Uprocks, and I looked at Collider and a couple other like online sites, and then I talked to a couple of friends, and I had to agree, this cartoon was one of the cartoons that kind of is the gateway, so to speak, into liking nerddom or being a comic book fan. And I say this because it's very near and dear to my heart. X-Men. Now, Marvel at the time had older cartoons in the 80s, but nothing was as awesome as the X-Men. It was one of the cartoons that the animation was solid, the stories were as close to being from the comic books as like perfect. I would say like 90% of the stories were pulled from the comics. Just everything about the show was awesome. And I mean, at that time, Marvel really didn't have any other cartoons except for Spider-Man. Now, Spider-Man had gone through several iterations, as did the X-Men, because you had Spider-Man and his amazing friends, you had Wolverine show up on the Incredible Hulk cartoon, and Wolverine was also a part of the Spider-Man Amazing Friends franchise as an Australian accent. He'd be like, crikey, mate, I'm gonna get you here. I was like, no, Wolverine's like Canadian, don't give him an Australian accent. But it's kind of funny that an Aussie and, you know, Hugh Jackman eventually becomes the Wolverine. Just sidebar for people that don't realize that. Just kind of funny how, like, back then they figured it out that he was going to be the casted as Wolverine. But the cartoon just covered so many great story arcs from the comics. Even went on its own to do some different spins. Yeah, there were several other X-Men cartoons that came out. Like on WB, they had their X-Men like cartoon series that was like the young X-Men kind of doing a reboot of the X-Men franchise. Nah, that was okay. But this X-Men cartoon, I'm talking about Fox's, the animation and everything. Like, you hear the theme song and it just is like rings in your ears and you're like, oh my god, that's like, like, I know it's terrible, but that's literally, I remember seeing Gambit throw the cards. I remember buying all the action figures. It was such a great cartoon, and it was definitely a gateway for nerds to feel linked more to something that they not only read in a comic book, but they're now seeing it animated. And that was like, the 90s was like a perfect time for that, especially when the X-Men did start coming out in the latter end of the 90s. So that was my number 2. Now, before I get to number 1, you guys always know I do an honorable mention on my top 5 lists. This one, I actually gotta admit, I'm kind of torn, because I was gonna pick one cartoon to be honorable mention, but I had to go with 3. The first of the 3 is Darkwing Duck. I mean, if anybody's a fan of Batman, Darkwing Duck was the Disney afternoons, and sometimes on Saturday mornings when I think he got moved, to just being the, you know, I'm the terror that flaps in the night. I am the thumbtack that sticks in your shoe. I am Darkwing Duck. I mean, he had such corny lines, but he was just, it was so lively and boisterous that when on my last visit to New York back in April, when I got to see my nephew and I hung out with my best friend, my childhood best friend Larry, and we're sitting there rewatching just episodes of Darkwing Duck, and we actually got to watch a couple that were unaired where like he actually goes and fights the devil, and it was kind of cool. Like, I was very surprised that Disney did some different themes, but Darkwing Duck was similar in that vein of Gargoyles, where it was a very well-received show for cult fans, but it didn't resonate a lot. Like, I remember having some of the toys, but it was not something that when I went to Disney parks, I saw anything for it. Same with Gargoyles. So definitely Darkwing Duck was number 1. Number 2 on the honorable mentions list, another Disney afternoon, which I like almost had forgotten, was like Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers. I mean, you took Chip and Dale, the most like weird and corny like little squirrels, and turned them into these like leaders for a team. And you know, they got Gadget, they had Monterey Jack and Zipper, and they had like, they went so many different places, and it was so awesome to see 2 characters that were rather obscure form a team and actually do some really cool stuff and show that even being small, you still had a big effect on what you could do in the world. You know, and I loved the interactions between the individual characters. I liked the growth of the characters as just well as their maturity. And it was definitely a different show. Again, in that same vein for me as a young adult watching those shows, and then growing up into adulthood, and then like saying, wow, I want my kids to watch these shows, because I think that the themes were just so well done. And, you know, like again, like it's Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers. I mean, obviously Dale should have led the team, but again, I'm biased because I like Dale. But Chip was still pretty cool, you know. The third honorable mention is SWAT Cats. Now, a lot of people did not watch this. This was definitely on Cartoon Network that's how I remember watching it. I mean, it was a very cool show. The voice of Donatello was one of the SWAT Cats. 2 guys working in like a junkyard. They were former military. They got rejected, and then they end up like becoming like freelance vigilantes. Very dark show. Then they kind of lightened it up. I've seen the Kickstarter, and I remember there was somebody that did a YouTube video like on the history of SWAT Cats, and it was like when I was thinking of these honorable mentions, it was like SWAT Cats popped into my head, and I was like, you know, they're giving it a reboot. It's definitely going to be awesome to see it. It's been a long time coming. I'm super hyped for it. If you guys ever get to check it out, I know the Kickstarter's been down, but go look on Kickstarter, look for SWAT Cats. If it's back up, support it. It's the crew's getting back together to do something positive for it. And I'm hoping that, you know, Toonami, Cartoon Network, you know, any of these networks that are doing the cartoons decide to pick it up and have a run for it. Or hell, put it on Netflix, make it one of the Netflix original cartoons. I think that'd be rad. So that's my honorable mentions. Now, the number 1. Now, everybody's going to say, Dre, you're biased. And I'll probably agree with you. I probably am biased. But the number 1 cartoon of the 90s, in my opinion, was Batman the Animated Series. Now, I'm not just saying that because everybody knows I'm a diehard Batman fan, even though I'm wearing a Spider-Man t-shirt today. But, you know, gotta change up the wardrobe every now and then. You guys can't keep seeing me in Batman everything. I mean, I have a lot of Batman t-shirts, but still, you know, Spidey today. But Batman the Animated Series was, for me, an amazing, and still is, one of the best cartoons I ever watched. It tugged at my heartstrings. I mean, it gave me Batman in the most dark sense, as I needed to for a comic book fan. Now, when growing up, I wasn't that big a fan of Batman. I used to love Spider-Man and Superman. I had a very different love for heroes, but that cartoon opened my eyes up to Batman's past and how he built his legacy. You know, you got to see the backstory for Bruce and how he ended up building the family. You know, how Alfred was really a linchpin to keeping Bruce together. You know, how, you know, the villains in the Batman universe were not just these broken people, that they were actually people that had lives before this corruption inside them or this shift to change. I mean, it spawned several great movies. Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill cemented their legacies in my mind in doing this. And I mean, thank you. I mean, Kevin Conroy friended me on Facebook, and I'm like, oh my God, thank you. And I think the fact that there are so many people that can identify with Batman, and they look at the cartoon and how it's permeated into where other actors like Jason O'Mara and Bruce Greenwood are doing justice to Batman on so many levels. And you're like, wow, look at this evolution of Batman from the 90s to now. You know, 20 plus years of Batman cartoons and how awesome it's become. So, I mean, yes, if you guys have not ever watched an episode of the animated series, it is definitely worth the watch. I mean, it is just fantastic artwork, fantastic storytelling. It is, to me, quintessentially the best 90s cartoon I remember growing up with. And it beat out The Simpsons because, I mean, hell, They were going on Sundays at 8 o'clock, and I remember rushing home before going to bed, before school, or like taping them just to watch them, and it was some of the best cartoons ever. So, hands down, yes, folks. So, what did you guys think of this list? Did you guys like the list? Did you guys be like, hey, Dre, I don't like your list? Hey, why didn't this cartoon make your list? Comment below, subscribe to the channel, hit me up on Twitter or the fan page. Y'all know where those links are. But as always, my friends, I know I have more to do and I have so much more to talk about, but we'll save it for next time. And as always, my friends, stay geeky.